Gary Neville was off on one of his rants about get the Glazers out. Okay, and replace them with whom? Because Chelsea just got sold for £2.5 billion. If you think Chelsea are worth £2.5 billion, what are Manchester United going to be worth? Welcome to this week's edition of One to One with Simon Jordan, a pre-Graham Souness edition. Dun, 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 dun. Now, of course, moving forward from that, don't forget to keep liking and subscribing, and of course, leaving your questions in the comment section below. But let's get on with this week's show. The question that comes up at the beginning of the season from certain sections of the media is about sack races, and I never like it. I never like thinking of a half empty glass rather than a half full glass. But I suspect it's part and parcel of modern day football. People's expectations are so high. So if we're going to distill it down for the purpose of this question, who's most likely to get their walking papers first? Well, it's a mixed bag. I think Everton know where they are. I think they know that they haven't got a playing squad that's got huge amounts of investment in it this season. They're making up for this mismanagement of ownership and previous managers on a playing squad acquisition that's just broken every kind of financial fair play boundary, even though they've been able to make adjustments to get themselves beneath the sanction point and just really have their transfer spend slightly controlled by the Premier League. And then you have the other argument that's being advanced, Steven Gerrard. I think Steven is in slightly treacherous water because I think the expectation, without knowing the owners, but the expectation is for Aston Villa to kick on. They kind of didn't last year. They got a bump, then a drop, and then a bump, and then a lift. And I think Gerrard is probably the one with the greater expectation. Now, that greater expectation, if not fulfilled, will lead to the pressure that we're talking about, which is people losing their job. Difficult to see whether Gerrard is going to be the first casualty because of the profile of the fella. I think he will be a decent manager. I think he's still learning. I think he has the gravitas and the outlook and the shoulders back mentality. Whether he has the tactical nous, we'll see. If I were to pick, and I would rather not pick either, I think maybe Gerrard, but I'm underwhelmed by Frank. I was a major advocate for him at Chelsea. I was a voice that talked about his dismissal being slightly unfair, but I'm not overwhelmed by his contribution to Everton. He did the job last year by the skin of his teeth. I didn't think Everton were particularly compelling on Saturday, but then again, what do you say about Aston Villa? They were shocking against Bournemouth. So I think there's a resonance to the question. But I hope both of these boys, as pretty decent football people in terms of, if you think football people are decent, but leaders and great players and potentially good coaches, I hope that they get the opportunity to be successful. But like anything else in life, if they're not, they'll suffer the consequences of it. So if I'm going to weigh it up, Steven Gerrard. I mean, look, the argument that Liverpool need to invest in their midfield has been running for some time because there's always this element of just that extra bit of creativity in there. Thiago is a very good player. I wasn't sure of him a couple of years ago. Danny Murphy made me a convert. I think he's an outstanding player. I think you cannot take anything from one individual game, despite a pitch being dry, Jurgen. And you have to look at the Fulham's performance. You also have to look at the vitality and energy that Liverpool brought at times. When you look at Núñez and you look at Diaz and you look at some of the players on that pitch there, they are irresistible at times. Liverpool are a fascinating side with a fascinating manager. I think you can always improve. You know, you can always raise the bar. Last year, Man City didn't have a centre forward, yet won the league, okay, by a point, but the two teams at the top of the league ran away with the league. So, do I think they could improve in their midfield? Probably. Would I think that if they needed to and it was a priority and Jurgen Klopp saw the same things as we see, or think we see, that he wouldn't have prioritised that? I think Liverpool have a distinct possibility, despite the nature of the performance against a very revved up and first game of the season Fulham. I think it'll be Liverpool's Premier League this year. So it goes against the argument of needing additional quality, but you can never have too much quality. If they can find the player that you're referring to and you think they need, then I'm sure they'll acquire them. But I think Liverpool are going to be one of the top sides in the Europe this year. I suspect they may well win the Premier League, as I've just suggested, and they may well have another tilt at the Champions League. So it's difficult to say, well, hang on a second, they haven't got a creative midfield with all that in mind. So Yes and no is the answer. This is a difficult one because the speeches that are already trotting out from the usual suspects, the seemingly omnipotent voices of certain ex-Man United players that get memos from Sky that tell them that everything they say has to be taken at face value. Look, what is it you want them to do? The manager comes in the door, he has a predilection to try and buy Dutch players. He wants the players that he thinks he knows and trusts, and the owner's job is to give him those opportunities to buy them. It's not the owner's job to go and tell him which players he's going to get. Maybe there's some suggestions from the coaching setup and the scouting network of what he may or may not want, but if Erik ten Hag has come into Man United knowing anything or seeing anything from the past, it will be that I need to own my own outcome, make my own decisions, be definite in what the players that I want, and maybe change up that low-level, under-resilient-spaced dressing room that seems to have forgotten what it's like to play for Manchester United or even resemble the sort of characters that you'd want from Man United players. So, go to the question, why are they pursuing Frankie de Jong? The messages that are coming out of Barcelona are that the player doesn't want to go, he wants to stay at Barcelona. The player seems to want to stay at Barcelona. There seems to be argument about his salary and the deferral of his wages. So you've been chasing a player now for 12 weeks that the manager wants. How's that the owner's responsibility, besides drawing a line under the manager and saying you can't have that player because clearly he doesn't want to come? This narrative, and I'm no campaigner for the Glazers, that the Glazers are the devil incarnate, the Kaiser Solskjaer of football, and for Man United they are the reasons why. The reasons why is the players don't perform and the managers don't do enough. And some of the commercial decisions made by Ed Woodward in the past were curious, and maybe Richard Arnold was cut from the same cloth. But you look at it and say, you've got to suggest that Ten Hag has got to get hold of this dressing room, whether it's Brighton or not. You should have enough to be able to beat Brighton on an opening day. Brighton are a good side, there's no God-given rights. So I don't think so. When we talk about, oh, get the Glazers out, you know, Gary Neville was off on one of his rants about get the Glazers out. Okay, and replace them with whom? Because Chelsea just got sold for £2.5 billion. If you think Chelsea are worth £2.5 billion, what are Manchester United going to be worth? Who's going to pay that? And what do you think they're going to want in return for their money? Because the big thing about Chelsea is they've just been bought for £2.5 billion. Everyone complains about the Glazers loading it with debt. This is debt in a different guise. This is private equity play in Chelsea that's going to want to return on its money. So people do need to remember about what it is that owning a football club involves. Not everyone is Sheikh Mansour that maybe wants to sports wash or legitimise a regime or have soft influence or just be a benefactor because they're Father Christmas. The idea that they got best in class at United, that's the part where I will agree with the Man United fans. I don't think they've got an infrastructure that has the best in class, but I'm not entirely sure they ever did. I think what they had at the time was David Gill, who was very good at what he did, and Alex Ferguson, who was exceptional at what he did. And the two forces came together and built a very successful Man United for a period of time. And like everything, everything's cyclical. So it can be easily laid at the door of the owners. I think that you've got to start off by looking at the culture of the playing squad, the culture of the management structure. And of course that's a byproduct of the owners. But really and truly, it's a fiefdom that the managers and players want to live in, but all of a sudden when it goes wrong, that's the owner's fault. Mixed answer, everyone can do better at Manchester United. Well, Spud, if I can take that name at face value. Chelsea are in a state of flux. You've got a manager that's complaining about them not being ready, which in part is his job. You've got people alleging that the owners are too busy by buying too many players and being in for everybody. You've got players that have been bought previously that seemingly score a lot of goals in German football and now can't score goals in English football and are probably going back to German football in Timo Werner. You've got an overload, it would seem, of certain positions in terms of Mark Cucurella coming in and perhaps challenging Ben Chilwell, but maybe they're going to set up differently. Obviously, Chelsea, when you look at Erling Haaland for Manchester City and you look at the potency of that particular player, and then you look at Chelsea's version of it last year, Romelu Lukaku, and you look at where they are now, which is they look a bit blunt, and they look as if they are lacking and needing a focal point. It's clear to me Chelsea probably need a very good centre forward. They thought they bought the one last year, they clearly didn't. And I think Tuchel needs to get his head back in the game. They won on Saturday. It was unimpressive as far as I was concerned. But I think there's lots being made of the loss of Christensen or the loss of Rudiger. If these players were wanted by Chelsea a year ago before all of the collapse of the Roman Empire, then they would have been dealt with then. I think you've just got to accept that Man City and Liverpool at this moment in time are on a different trajectory, and Chelsea have got to reboot themselves. Maybe Aubameyang, I think culturally that's all wrong, but Tuchel's had him before and speaks highly of him. I just think that we've got to focus on the fact that Chelsea will still likely be a top 4 side, but they're not in the same zip code as Liverpool and Manchester City in terms of winning a league, and that's something that Chelsea fans may have to acclimatise to in their minds. How worried am I by Rashford's form? I'm not the slightest bit worried. Why would I be worried about Marcus Rashford? I think the person that should be worried about Marcus Rashford's form is Marcus Rashford, because Marcus has made a sizable impression when he launched his career at Man United, and I think he's been on a steady decline. Not so much a violent decline, but because the decline has been steady, it's now reached a level where people are becoming increasingly concerned about his performances. I see he looks stronger and physically bigger this season, albeit the outcomes were pretty similar. I don't think it's distractions off the pitch, or maybe it is not the distractions that we think about, the charitable work that he's done, that is commendable, but maybe other distractions that have caused him to take his eye off the ball. I think the culture of Manchester United is probably wrong. And I think also Marcus Rashford, not probably wrong, factually wrong. And if you listen to people like Ronaldo, that once upon a time went into dressing rooms when they were young players, they listened to senior players, and these United young players don't seem to listen to anybody. But you also look at the fact that we in this country have this propensity to build players to a level that they're not at, and to put them on a platform that they shouldn't be on, and then judge them by those standards and then whittle them away. Rashford is a decent player. You've got to be a good player for play for Manchester United. You've got to be a decent player to get in the England setup. But you've got to be honest about what Rashford really is. He's not an outstanding player. He's a good player, and he's lost his way. And maybe either Ten Hag's, foot up his backside, or a change of environments might be the thing that saves Rashford. But there is nothing besides, in the minds of Gareth Southgate, a bit of history that would make Marcus Rashford a shoo-in or a consideration for the World Cup in November. But like everything, he's an English player. I want him to be successful. I want him to get himself together. But I also want us to judge him by the standards that he's really at, rather than these ones that people have put him onto, which I think are inflated. So, am I worried about Rashford? No, I'm not worried about him. I'm not worried about whether he succeeds or fails. I hope, like all talented kids, that they grasp the nettle. They don't waste their careers. They don't disappear into rabbit holes like Dele Alli, or forsake 3 years of their career like Jesse Lingard. And I hope Rashford grasps the nettle and reboots himself, and that we get a better player than we've seen in the last 18 months. And if we don't, then if the worry is the right word, then I think he's wasting his time, and I worry that you only get one time round on this merry-go-round, and wasting time is something you should never do, and Marcus Rashford may be wasting his own time at the moment. Right, that's it for this week's edition of One to One with Simon Jordan. Don't forget to let me know your views on Liverpool, Manchester United and Chelsea. Of course, keep liking and subscribing, and equally as importantly, leaving those questions in the comment section below, and I look forward to seeing you next week.